young scholars, this is going to be your content video for classical Greece. Now, like we mentioned, there are 4 classical civilizations we'll be studying in this unit. Greece just happens to be the first of them. So let's dive on in. The classical Greek civilization was located in what is modern-day Greece. If you look on a map for the country of Greece, that area of the world is where the Greek classical civilization was located. It's in modern-day Europe, and it's located in the Mediterranean Sea. Its geography is going to be extremely important in Greece's history. So let's talk about that geography really quick. There are a few geographic features that should jump right out at you when we look at this map of Greece. Greece is actually a peninsula, right? It's surrounded on 3 sides by water. It's surrounded by the Mediterranean Sea on 3 sides. You'll also notice, though, at the southern edge, there are islands. Greece is actually made up of a bunch of islands. Not only are there a bunch of islands, but they're close together, so that also makes Greece an archipelago, right? So right off the bat, there are 3 geographic features that you're very familiar with that you can see just by looking at this map of Greece. Peninsula, islands, archipelago. Now there's one more feature that's super important to the development of Greece, specifically during the classical age, and that feature is mountains. Greece has mountains covering that whole peninsula. Even the islands themselves are very mountainous. Now that's going to have an important impact on Greek civilization. We know that mountains are a natural barrier. They're a barrier because it keeps people away from each other. People don't want to be walking or traveling through mountains. That's treacherous, that's hard work. So for the most part, when civilizations or when cities develop, they're going to kind of grow in between the mountains. Those people groups are going to be separate. And because they're separate and isolated from each other, they're going to develop different cultures. They're not all going to look the same way. When we study ancient Greece, we're going to learn that because of this mountainous terrain, many different city-states developed. A city-state is a city that basically treats itself like its own government. So here's the deal, especially back in the time of this ancient Greece or this classical Greece time period, cities in Greece didn't consider themselves part of the larger peninsula of Greece. You wouldn't walk up to someone who lived on this peninsula or lived on these islands and they wouldn't say to you, oh yeah, I'm Greek. They would say that they come from a very specific city-state. So let's talk about these city-states. They kind of grew up individually, like we mentioned, and they learned to govern themselves in many different ways. City-states would have different forms of government, different kinds of cultures, different kinds of values. In order to explain or to showcase just how different these city-states could be, we're going to look at 2 in particular. There are 2 that are really important to the study of classical Greece. One is Athens and one is Sparta. Let's start with Sparta. When you think of Sparta, I want you to think of one thing: military. The whole city-state of Sparta was focused around being the best, the strongest, the most fit warriors or soldiers possible, okay? From the age of like 6 or 7, boys in Sparta would be taken from their families and moved to military training camps where they would stay until they were into their 30s. Now here's something interesting. Because the focus for men and boys was on military excellence, there was still room for women in Spartan society. In fact, they had a really important role. Number 1, they had to be fit and strong themselves, physically. Now, they weren't taught in crazy hand-to-hand combat the way that the boys and men were, but they were taught to be fit, and they would participate in competitive sports and exercises so that they became fit, healthy women, because guess what their main goal was in life, or at least for their society? Their job was to produce and to birth really strong babies, baby boys in particular, that would then grow up to be strong warriors. Women in Sparta also had an important role when those men and boys went off to war. Who was going to take care of the society? Who was going to run it? The women were the ones who would step up and make sure that society ran smoothly until the men and boys came back from war. So that's Sparta, just in a nutshell. But let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about another city-state that was considered part of classical Greece. We're going to see just how different their cultures were, though. The next classical Greek city-state we're going to look at is Athens. Athens experienced a golden age. I want you to know what a golden age is first. When you think of gold, you think of something good, right? Something that's valuable, something that you want. A golden age is a time period where a civilization experiences peace, prosperity or wealth, and achievements. There are lots of innovations that happen during a golden age. So what are some things that happened during this Athenian golden age? Well, the first thing you need to know is that it was ushered in by a man named Pericles. Pericles was a leader in the Athenian government. He actually made some reforms and some laws that kind of helped Athens to begin this golden age. One of the really important ones was payment for people who served in the Athenian government. Now, in Athens, they began a type of government known as democracy. Now, you guys know what democracy is because we studied different forms of government in an earlier unit. To refresh your memory, though, a democracy is a kind of government where all of the citizens get a voice in making laws and deciding how their government or their city or the civilization is going to be run. Pericles made it so that no matter who you were, whether you were rich or you were poor, if you were chosen to be part of that Athenian government, you were going to get paid for it. Now, we can't downplay this importance of democracy. It's also important to know that during the Athenian Golden Age, education was extremely valuable. It was something that was valued by people living at that time period. In Athens, young men and young boys, between the ages of 6 and 7, would start training in education. They would learn how to read and write. They would learn civics. They would read great literature, and they would be expected to be knowledgeable in these different areas. That's something that was extremely important to Athenians. Also important to note, though, not every young boy or man was allowed to get an education in Athens. It was basically reserved for the upper class. There's something else I need you to know about the Athenian Golden Age. During this time period, philosophers started to get paid for their work. If you don't know what a philosopher is, it's a person who thinks about the big questions in life. They'll talk about what is the meaning of life, why are we here, what makes the best kind of government, what makes the best kind of family. Any of these big questions that are hard to answer, a philosopher will think about. During this time period, in the Athenian Golden Age, philosophers are being paid to do this work. It's kind of ties in with their emphasis on education. There are 3 major philosophers that come out of the Athenian Golden Age. They are Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These 3 men had ideas and had students who kind of followed their thinking and studied their lines of thought. Their students would write down a lot of the conversations and debates that they had in order to pass them on to future generations. So that's why these 3 philosophers in particular are really important in Athenian history. Aristotle, in fact, becomes a mentor and a teacher to a really important person in history named Alexander the Great. Lastly, during the Athenian Golden Age, one of their major achievements was in drama. Now, maybe some of you are involved in plays or dramas, maybe you have been in school in the past. It's good to know that during the Athenian Golden Age, there were many playwrights who really pushed the boundaries of the genres of comedy and tragedy. You know that comedies are more lighthearted, have more of a happier message. Sometimes they're funny. And then tragedies, on the other hand, are more serious plays. But during the Athenian Golden Age, these 2 types of drama really are explored, and there are great achievements in writing new dramas. So as you can see, the geography in Greece during the classical age had a huge impact on the development of that civilization. It created separate city-states with lots of different cultures being created that were very separate from each other. But, for example, the 2 that I talked about, Athens and Sparta, those are 2 examples of very different civilizations, but they're all considered part of classical Greece. That's all I've got for you for classical Greece, young scholars. Make sure you rewatch this video as many times as you need to in order to get the information into your brains. And take some notes. Make sure that vocabulary goes into your notebook. See you next time.